Season 4 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, Polar Inertia, a journal of nomadic and popular culture, online at polarinertia.com, and by Press Up, friendly web consultants who listen to your goals and provide solutions that make sense, online at pressupinc.com. Thinking about the intersection of food and punk rock in Los Angeles, I think of the stories I hear from people who've been here 20, 30, 40 years, who were into that scene in the early 80s, say, and they talk about, for some reason it's always Oki-dog. They were eating before punk rock shows. They'd always be scarfing down an Oki-dog. Do you have any insight into why that would be? Is it just, do unhealthy food and punk rock go really well together here?
I would say that yes. I mean, just because, the motto and, the ethos of punk rock is, live fast, die young. So whatever food I can scarf down my throat that I can have more beer money for is, which that includes everything from, hot dogs to a lot of frozen food to a lot of fast food. And it's funny, about the Oki-dog thing, because even if you go there now, there still is a lot of, older punk people that hang out there.
The Fairfax or the Pico, or only the Fairfax?
I mean, the Fairfax one is the one that I've been to. I've been there with a couple of... I went there with Andrew Zimmern when I came out on the show, Bizarre Foods with Andrew Zimmern. And even, a person like him that, is more like a food culture geek guy, he had a lot to say about the Oki-dog, and just that... The punk part of Oki-dog's reign is, really, really key to its success, I would say.
For those who don't know what that is, what goes into an Oki-dog? There's a tortilla, there's chili, there's pastrami, there's sausage. Is there something else in there?
You know what? I'm not personally a fan of that stuff, so...
I know you're not the authority, but we're here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I would make it a point that nowadays, the official food of punk rock is, in Los Angeles, is tacos. Just because... I grew up in East Los Angeles and going to backyard gigs, punk rock gigs, and I've written about the subject extensively. And, if it wasn't Jack in the Box drive-thru, if you didn't have a car, you can't do it. So the next best thing was tacos. There were taco shops everywhere, taqueros everywhere. And so I'm going to actually make it a point to change punk rock's official food here in Los Angeles from Oki-dog to tacos.
Indeed, it is once the city of Oki-dog, now the city of tacos. We're sitting in today, Los Angeles, California, specifically Highland Park, a Notebook on Cities and Culture, where I'm talking with Javier Cabral. He is a food writer formerly known as the Teenage Glutster, now known as simply the Glutster, writing on subjects, to go by the subject line of his blog, food, booze, and punk rock. He's also a scout for Jonathan Gold at the Los Angeles Times, and he is a producer on the official title was the Pocho Hour of Power on KPFK?
With Lalo Alcaraz, yeah, man. I've really been lucky that I've fallen in line to meet a lot of successful fellow Mexican-American creative people, such as Lalo Alcaraz, the cartoonist, and Gustavo Arellano, who's Ask a Mexican. I've worked under both of them, and they both have really helped me to just get out there and bust your ass and release content. So.
I want to get Gustavo on the show at some point, but he never comes to Los Angeles, it seems, so I'm going to have to find a way to drag my ass down to Costa Mesa or wherever one day. But on the subject of the taco, I mean, this is a subject relevant to him and you. As you say, you want it to be the official punk rock food of Los Angeles. I was just recently at the Los Angeles Taco Festival in Boyle Heights. I was at Tacolandia last year, not this year. There's another taco festival whose name escapes me, but there's a lot of taco events these days. Why has such an old food gained so much attention in the 21st century?
Well, first of all, if you get it, I mean, if you're asking me, you're obviously gonna get a biased answer. Both my parents are from Mexico. I was born and raised in San Gabriel Valley and East Los Angeles. So I'm gonna tell you that the reason why tacos are finally getting the respect they deserve is because it is essentially the perfect freaking food. I mean, the core of it, and it's stripped. If you strip everything away to a most basic taco, you're gonna have a tortilla, which will most likely be corn. It should be corn, which is a whole grain. Then you're gonna have a lean meat, and then you're gonna have a flavorful salsa, and it's all relatively healthy. I mean, sure you can argue against the source of the meat and whether it's grass fed or whether you can get all technical about that stuff, but essentially it really is a healthy food to consume. and it's $1 or $2 or $3 or $4. So it's really affordable. Los Angeles, with being the home to the most amount of Mexicans outside of Mexico City, even more so than Guadalajara, you're gonna find a bunch of regional styles here, so you can really geek out on the subject. And there's people that love to geek out on food subjects. So.
Right. It made me realize at the taco festival just the other day that taco knowledge, or rather taco experience, has penetrated less far outside of Los Angeles than being here would lead me to believe. Like, there was a girl behind me in line. The guy was taking orders down the line. He said there was tongue, obviously there's lengua, and the girl was just like, oh, tongue, oh, I'm not going to get that. Like, she turned to everybody in her group, she's like, I'm not getting that, are you getting that? She was almost angry that there was tongue on the menu, and I was like, lengua, that's the main thing you have on a taco. So clearly there's some work to be done. Do you think that work is happening? Is knowledge pushing outward from Los Angeles as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a smaller demographic. That type of person in Los Angeles, or just food culture in the U.S. is just exploding right now. We're much behind in with Europe and Mexico and other cultures that really, really appreciate the serious and take their food seriously. And I feel like that demographic of people that still are squeamish about simple things like tongue or other awful meats every day they're decreasing. And tongue is a perfect example of that. Tongue is the gateway offal to other offals. It's tender and it's really meat-like. So
when you get the buche.
You know what? To be like blunt with you, I personally do not like to eat much offals, but it's just me. I just for my work I have to I eat it, I give it a shot, I chew it, I swallow it, but
no joy in that.
You can imagine like Ratatouille, freaking the food critic Anton Ego, like he won't swallow it. But no, actually, for me it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm still 25 and I haven't matured into those kind of gamey, meaty flavors just yet. But but even if you don't eat offal, there's plenty of other fillings of tacos to geek out on. You can geek out on right now. Take like the simplest of all, which is carne asada. Carne asada has really redeveloped itself recently, just because there's been a slew of the Tijuana vendors or people that are doing a Tijuana style carne asada, which is a slightly higher quality of meat, but they always use mesquite wood to grill it, so you get a little more flavor. And there's 2 places in LA right now that do it, and they have like some of the biggest lines on weekends. So even if you don't eat tongue, even if you don't eat sesos, even if you don't want to get crazy, you can still have your carne asada, but still be fairly high. Like you can still see what a good taco is and propel taco culture. So
you can get adventurous in different dimensions than the type of meat.
Yes, exactly, correct.
What would be an ideal taco of yours?
These days, I really, Los Angeles is also really, really getting into seafood. I don't know if you've noticed lately. There's a wave of like, not just talking about tacos, but there's Connie and Ted's with their lobster rolls. Everyone loves lobster rolls now. There's a bunch of oyster places popping up. There's a bunch of so seafood is really exploding here in LA, and that's kind of mariscos has always been big in Mexican culture, seafood. But even now, you're starting to see a lot of people more interested in tacos. Just look at the winner of the winners of the last 2 Taco Madness events. The one for last year was Mariscos Jalisco in Boyle Heights, which specialized in a crispy shrimp taco. And this year's was El Coralhuense for a fish al pastor. It was a mahi-mahi style al pastor taco. And so I recently met my girlfriend, who was born and raised in Puerto Vallarta, which is a coastal town of Mexico. So recently I've been really taking seafood tacos seriously. Everything from a proper fish taco to a proper cocktail, to a proper tostada, to a proper, which they all require some kind of corn product to eat with. So I consider those a form of a taco. So.
It gets at the variety of Mexican food there is, and it's one of those things, like you posted about this watching Top Chef, and judges would talk about how a guy was, just doing Mexican food, like that word, just Mexican food. What's up with the just in front of Mexican food?
You know what, the sad reality is that, well, in LA, like you mentioned earlier, in LA, sure we are, Mexican food here in LA is becoming more regional by the day. People are starting to appreciate these things, but the rest of the U.S., with the exception of New York and Chicago and other places where a lot of Mexicans live their notion of Mexican food is still, a lot of yellow cheese, a lot of Tex-Mex and New Mexico and Arizona style Mexican food. So don't even get me started on this. I mean, I've really been helped a lot by my girlfriend, because she's, I thought I was a know-it-all in Mexican food, being like a Mexican American, and then like my girlfriend comes and like puts me on my place, man. I mean, you can't really. People here that claim that they're an expert in Mexican food, if you haven't lived or aren't from Mexico, it's really hard to take that title, just because everything as basic to a tortilla. Like most tortillas here in Los Angeles are crap. Like they get like the bread treatment, where they put a bunch of preservatives and stuff on them, and you don't really question it because it's like once it's slathered in like oil and like beef dripping, it's gonna taste good. So
it's all the same at that point.
So I wrote a story called for my blog. What I think this is like my last original content for my blog that I've created, just because I write now for so many like papers and newspapers and magazines. And it was a story called "Why the World Isn't Ready for a Mexican Top Chef," because during the last season of Top Chef, there was a chef by the name of Carlos Gaetan who owns he works at a restaurant in Chicago called Mexique, which is Mexican food with like I guess French flair, and he almost made it. He was third runner up. He was almost gonna win, and while his dish it was basically a seafood tamal, which by the way, not a tamale, get it right, tamal.
Important to underscore this.
Singular, not plural. He made an entire dough. He took out the corn part of it like a regular tamal, and he blended a bunch of like yummy seafood crustaceans and fish, and he made essentially a quenelle, a French quenelle. But because he chose to name it after a tamal, and he didn't, I'm almost like 100% positive. If he would have named it Mexican quenelle, he probably would have won, because the guy that ended up winning was criticized so much throughout the whole season for lack of seasonings, and you can't make a mistake more than twice in Top Chef and not get eliminated. So
part of this might have to do with the fact that in America, a lot of us have had to deal with bad Mexican food for a long time. So when you say Mexican food, somebody's actually thinking of bad food they had in childhood. They don't really know. They don't know anything but the version they had in Minnesota or wherever. But tell me how to put it? When Mexican food came to Los Angeles rather than Minnesota, it took its own direction, and a good one as well. I mean, how different is Los Angeles Mexican food at its best from Mexican food at its best?
We can talk about this subject all day, but John Bengold has had a discussion on this before, like what makes food truly authentic. And when it comes down to it, it's all about the local ingredients. I mean, here in Los Angeles, Mexican food at its best, if it's not like a big name chef or a chef with an investor in it, or someone that has some kind of special financial either investors or people that are willing to spend money on high quality meat and other products. The best you can get here in Los Angeles is really just going to depend on what's available from the local purveyors that are choosing to do Mexican products. So, like I mentioned earlier, the tortillas, for example, tortillas is one of the best examples because we take tortillas so for granted here in LA, so for granted. Corn tortillas, everyone thinks they're awesome, but it's crazy how many people turn a blind eye to tortillas. If you look at the back of a label of Guerrero tortillas, or even like a bunch of mom and pop nixtamal based tortillerias, the packaged tortillas that they flatten out and sell, just ready to reheat at home, are all made of maseca, and you can ask them, so they can have the best freaking masa on the planet, but their packaged tortillas are always going to be made out of maseca. That's just an unwritten rule that so many people abide by when it comes to tortillas. And that maseca is GMO. If you look it up online, it's scary how there's nothing that confirms that. But if you actually read deeper, you'll find out that maseca is GMO. So it really just depends on the products, and let's say a taquero, right? A taquero that everyone that has that a good example is Tacos Leo. I'm not hating on Tacos Leo. They make a good al pastor taco. They make one of only legit tacos al pastor, which means that they grill the pork straight off of the spit, shawarma style, and it lands directly into your tortilla. It does not get seared in a plancha underneath. Ask them about the quality of their pork. I mean, where do they get their pork from? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they get it to some kind of, food purveyor. And I'm not gonna say Smart and Final or U.S. Foods or Cisco, but and then source the pork. I mean, is that pork gonna be hormone free? Is it gonna be as fresh and local and freshly slaughtered as the pork that you can get in Mexico? And the same goes with vegetables. Cilantro in Mexico, onion in Mexico. All these foods are a lot more fresher than what you can get here in the U.S. market. And all those factors ultimately add up to the overall your dish, whatever you eat. So, my girlfriend, every time we go to Mexico, which is at least 3 times a year, a couple times a year, I'm actually gonna go move there for a couple of months. In 2 months, I'm gonna go move there to live there for a while. We settled on a grace period that we have whenever we go to Mexico and we come back to in Los Angeles, because everyone associates with LA is like the king of Mexico. I mean, it's the best place for Mexican food, and LA does Mexican food right. But the truth of the matter is, if you eat Mexican food from Mexico City, from Guadalajara, anywhere in Mexico, and you come back here and you have a torta ahogada, the bread is probably not going to be as crusty. The pork, just because a bunch of environment factors plug in. So again, I can geek out on this all you want, but it really just comes down to the quality of the ingredients that ultimately make up a dish here, a Mexican dish here. And in Mexico, because it's not, I mean, it's definitely getting there, but it's not as as standard, as corporate, as a factory raised, as a, what's the word I'm searching here?
Homogenous, maybe?
Yes, it's not as homogenous as it is here. Yes, although it is getting there, but it's still gonna be at least 5-10 more years until it becomes as industrial. So.
These things happen, I suppose. But tell me, what do you think of it when you think of a Mexican food that is quintessentially a Los Angeles Mexican food? What do you think of?
A quintessential Los Angeles Mexican food, if you ask me, is a bean and cheese burrito.
Really?
I mean, if you look at that burrito bracket that What's Your Face is doing, what's the writer that's doing that? She's going all around the U.S. and looking for the best burrito.
The name escapes me, but I know who you mean.
The L&B's bean and cheese burrito from Boyle Heights is, I think it's in the final 4 or in the final 3, and I lost track of that. I don't know if it won, if it got knocked out, but how is it that a bean and cheese burrito can knock out all of the other burritos that are found in the U.S.? Is that because a bean and cheese burrito is as a Mexican American product? It's a flour tortilla, and it's beans that are most likely refried with lard, and then with yellow cheese and a green or red salsa. So it's a nice middle ground between the core influence. The main influences is northern Mexican food, where the flour tortilla was born. But then it gets like that fast food kind of greasy American component, which is the refried beans and the yellow cheese, which is processed yellow cheese. So, and I guarantee you, if you ask any Los Angeles born or a person of Mexican descent that has lived in LA for a long percentage of their life, they're all going to have some kind of nostalgic moment with bean and cheese burritos, whether it's their parents that they would have that for lunch instead of a ham and cheese sandwich like I did, or because you grew up eating at Taco Bell like I did also, or because you now eat the L&B's or what's the other place, Tepeyac, or all these bean and cheese burritos, and it's a simple, healthy. Well, it's a simple food that everyone can enjoy. So.
Outside of Mexican food, or indeed Los Angeles Mexican food, what are the types of food in Los Angeles you most enjoy eating now?
I would say Chinese food for sure. I'm originally from Alhambra, San Gabriel Valley, and then I actually ended up going back to Alhambra and graduating my high school.
You had it all around you.
Yeah, so I had it all around me, and you can go there and have amazing dumplings or amazing Sichuan food. And these days, whenever I eat out, I actually find myself eating out Sichuan food or Chinese food or Korean food more than Mexican food, because I eat a lot of Mexican food at home. So if I'm not eating Mexican food, I think my next cuisine will definitely be some kind of Asian, whether that be Chinese or Japanese or Korean. in that order.
Those are, yeah, you think of Southern California, those are probably the strongest types of food here just because there's so many of the people who can do it well here. I mean, I live in Koreatown, and therefore Korean food is, for me, one of the most regularly eaten cuisines. What do you find in Korean food that's so appealing?
What do you find in Korean food?
You personally find?
When you write about food for a living, you try to like always look for the foods that don't. In other words, like, all right, I know that there's like a ton of like all-you-can-eat barbecue places.
Yeah.
So but I know that the Korea, meat isn't subsidized like it is here, so meat is expensive. So like, what other dishes are there? What other stuff can I eat? So. My friend Matt Kang, he a long time ago, he took me to this place in Koreatown called Mapo Dukgaki. I'm butchering the name, I'm sure. And they don't, I think they have kalbi on the menu, but everything else is, they have like 40 other things on the menu. It's all just more, for lack of better words, like a Korean gisado. It's a stewed meat or stewed something, or that is not Korean barbecue. So every time I go eat Korean food, if it's not a Sunday because they're closed on Sundays, I go eat there, and I forget the name of it, but it's a dish. It's a chilled noodle dish with the somen noodles and a freshly made black sesame soybean milk, and it's iced and it has cucumbers and tomato in it. It's really thick and it's gonna sound extremely weird, but it's almost like eating cereal just because the soy milk has no sugar or salt in it. It's just a very neutral flavor, but it's nutty and fresh. And then we also end up getting the squid there, or the pork belly soup, or what else? What's the dish? Or like their gochujang braised mackerel, or their this just other types of dishes that, again, just because I love to experience food, all types of food, I like to geek out on other types of dishes that are not as mainstream, as hipster as that makes me sound.
And listeners, you can check out Matthew Kang, by the way, on this show a few episodes back. You'll easily find him. We talk in that interview about food as a means of exploring the city of Los Angeles. Was food the way you explored Los Angeles first, or was punk rock the way you first got out and around Los Angeles?
No, it was definitely punk rock. Punk rock was my first love. Actually, the reason why I really started getting into food, other than my older brother taking me out to expensive restaurants on the west side and investing in me at such a young age, I would read LA Weekly and just to find out what the local punk shows were at. What local punk fans were coming in from out of the country to play at the Key Club or the Roxy or the House of Blues. And then one day I think I was waiting for the bus and I was just browsing and reading whatever else just to read, and I started reading Jonathan Gold, and he really allowed me to see food and therefore experience other cultures. But definitely it was music that first took me out of East LA. So
where did it have you going? I mean, when you get into punk rock as a kid in East LA, where do you find yourself going to go to shows? Are you always in the eastern half of the city? Are you elsewhere? Are you going west or north, or where are you going?
The majority of the nights were backyards in East LA, and Boyle Heights, sometimes West Covina, in the boonies of San Gabriel Valley, South LA, sometimes San Fernando Valley. Backyards, man. Backyards.
Not on the west side is the point there.
Yeah, actually, I really tried hard to try to find shows on the west side, but I don't think, I don't think a family in Westwood would like 100 or so kids showing up, probably on the bus, drinking lots of 40 ounces of beer and making a ruckus. So,
what kind of music develops in the backyards of East LA?
It's punk rock. It's fast. It all sounds just the first wave the first wave of music that most backyard bands do. It's all going to be really fast, really aggressive. A lot of chords, a lot of distortion, so it's all going to sound real similar. It's only until later that they start to develop into either metal or more alternative or Spanish stuff or indie stuff that you start to craft out. But if you look at a lot of the bands that are a lot of Latino bands that are popular nowadays, La Santa Cecilia. I bet you if you ask them about backyard punk rock shows, they're gonna know all about it. And also Chicano Batman. Also, I can't think of any other bands right now, but they're all gonna have some kind of connection or tie to the East LA backyard, because that kind of catapults you into because in East LA, if you don't go to backyard shows, if you don't go to punk shows, then punk was one of the only musical ways to be involved to have something to do as a teenager in East LA. If it wasn't through punk, just because that was the most easily accessible. Then the other two choices were either immerse yourself in your studies and your books, or immerse yourself, by the streets and probably join a gang or a tagging crew or something. So.
3 choices in total: gang, punk rock, study.
Or study, exactly. And you can ask other people, and they're probably going to say the same thing. I was lucky enough that I found punk rock, and that kind of helped me for the better. And nowadays, it's crazy. You don't really realize that the stuff that you have access to and can tap into has any kind of monetary or social value. I mean, I just this last year I connected Vans off the wall with the East LA backyard scene, and wouldn't you know it became their 2014 campaign all around the world. I mean, you can go to like a metro in South Korea and a metro entrance in South Korea, and like if you saw a Vans commercial with like a kid like making out with a girl with like spiky hair, that was my friend Lance.
Oh yeah, I was just in South Korea. Maybe I saw that.
Yeah, and like if you go to any Vans store now, there in Brooklyn there was a huge poster, like I think like 200 feet by 200 feet, and it was my friend. They call him TV. He's a singer for a brand called Underground Alliance. He has like raccoon eyes. He paints his eyes like a raccoon. And he was like the official like poster child for the 2014 Vans campaign. So all this because I grew up in the scene, and I wrote about it for LA Weekly, and someone read it and like, oh hey, I wanna like tap into this. And I connected them, and there you go. I mean, now the whole world knows about the East LA backyard awesomeness. So.
Would you eat anything at these shows? Would you bring food, or was it all drinking?
Yeah, it was all drinking and drugs. I wouldn't, I was lucky enough that I never even have tried any of the harder stuff. I just stick to like 40s and marijuana. That's it. But it was really hard. I'm really surprised on myself that I didn't get sucked into other really bad, worse stuff that could have happened back then. But it's funny that because for my 21st birthday, I decided to hold a backyard gig in my house. Which, by the way, my house is not a house. I live in like a 4-unit apartment complex that my parents have, and the backyard was like a driveway, and like I'm like, whatever, it's 21, it's now or never. So I held a backyard punk show. I didn't charge anyone because it was a birthday, and I didn't want. And my mom ended up having like she felt bad. She wanted to have some kind of food for the kids, so she made like a huge pot, maybe like I don't know, like 40 pounds of like refried beans and tostadas and potato salad. Just really simple like foods to like. So people can eat and drink their beer, and it was really funny at that time. It's crazy the world I live in, because I was exposed to all that super street smart, like alleys and just all those kind of scenes. And then because of food, I would go to like ride like the 720 Rapid to like La Cienega, and go have like a crazy like, expensive meal at like one of the restaurants because they would invite me out there. Again, I was young, I was naive. I don't do that stuff anymore.
You don't get comped meals anymore?
I can't do that anymore because it's I have ethical standards now because I write for publications, and I don't.
But if you're back in the day when you were blogging, you could be like, "Come on, bring it on."
I mean, imagine if you're like a 17-year-old, like 16-year-old teenager, because this was around the time that I started writing about food and started like if your family is poor, like my family was, had a lot of financial issues. If a restaurant invited you to go have like steak and like didn't card you and they'll give you a bunch of booze, like how are you gonna say no to that? So
impossible. What kind of La Cienega places were you going to in those days, shaping your persona of food awareness on their dime?
I think SDK Steakhouse was one that I went to. That's one of the only ones that I can remember, because obviously I would go to this on the bus and I would get pretty freaking wasted.
Yeah.
But
that's when that line 720 comes in very handy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, it's everyone always likes to make fun of and talk crap about the LA public transit, but it's like I've never owned a car in my life. I've never purchased a car. I'm 25 now. I've been a product of the LA public transit. I take the bus and the train everywhere.
Same here, and I'm 29, so it's possible.
Exactly. It is possible, especially. I do own a scooter that I do use whenever I get lazy, but other than that, it's all public transit.
Tell me how you started. How did you start realizing that it would be possible to write about food?
I did it because, it was all around me. Because like I said earlier, in East LA and San Gabriel Valley, you really had access to all these nice restaurants that I can afford. The
food was there.
The food was there. But more than anything, it was just because my older brother started to take me out to restaurants on his dime, because my brother's has been a really big inspiration. His name is Javier Cabral. He's pretty big in the graffiti world. In the 80s, he's mentioned in like a bunch of graffiti books that are talking about the LA, his original writer scene. He's like the co-star of like a graffiti documentary that's about his friend that has ALS disease, and he was able to write again with his eyes through some technology that my brother helped to innovate. And so he's been a big inspiration to me. And he's been like an art director for a bunch of different companies around the world. And he was working for one in Venice because that's where he lives. He lives in Venice, California. And when you're a teenager, I was depressed. I would go through stuff. So he convinced me to go see his therapist to go check it out. And the funny thing is that, whenever we would go to these meetings, my dad, my brother, and my dad and I would drive out and brave the crosstown traffic for it every once a week. We would go eat out afterwards, and my brother would, because he in Venice, he had a good job, and so we would go eat out on his dime. And he was. I started to slowly realize that I would stare at the clock when I was in therapy to see when it would be over, and actually, I found out that the therapeutic session for me was the dinner afterwards.
Right.
And
the real therapy.
That was the real therapy, and that was how I started getting into food. And at 2006 and 2007, Yelp. I don't know if Yelp was around, but if it was, maybe it was really small. I didn't use Yelp.
Brand new.
I never heard of Yelp. Well, I did hear of Chowhound and the Chow boards and the message boards. But sometimes people there can be really rude and can be really snobby, and the moderators might like erase your question because someone else asked it the day before and you had no idea. So I kind of got fed up with that, and my older brother bought me a MacBook Pro for a long time ago, and then I started blogging because I've kept a journal, just a personal daily diary journal since I was in 4th grade. So a blog was like a natural step up, and I happened to find food, and I happened to like punk rock, and I happened to love to write. So all those elements just came together, and just
people booze and punk rock.
Yeah, and that's my slogan. That's the person that I've become now. So
tell me how you came up with the persona of the Teenage Glutster you began as, using your young age as, I guess, an angle.
You know what? That was just a product of the few food blogs that were out there. I would read Daily Gluttony was one of the main blogs I would read. She's an OG. Eat, Drink, and Be Merry, Deep End Dining. All these people started their blogs out in the early years. Like in 2005, eating LA. So as I would read these during class, actually, I would get in trouble because in my typing class, I would like be reading food blogs or looking at menus from around the world, and I would get like freaking I would get like the attention afterwards because I would read that. So I started to realize that there was all of these had a certain type of theme and a spiel to them and a writing voice, and without even knowing, I just mimicked it, and I just I transferred from Garfield in East LA, Garfield High School, to Alhambra High School from 10th to 11th grade, because and I had like this preconceived notion of like, oh, it's gonna be cool, I'm gonna meet new friends, and it's gonna be like everything's friendly and rosy. But actually, I didn't meet any people, and I was kind of a loner. So whenever I would hate, it was so much that I was like, your typical like J.D. Salinger, like Catcher in the Rye. I hated people, like just. So instead of I would write and write out my frustrations, and now instead of hanging out and instead of having any girlfriends, I would just go home and write on my blog about stuff, and that's just how the blog started. And I was lucky enough to just try to mimic these other blogs, these other food blogs, and just lend my own thing to them and my own voice to them, and develop my own voice through online. And people started reading it and commenting, and it just propelled itself into what it is now. So.
And what did you find out about, how to put it, what did you find out about how you could see things differently, or you could taste things differently, say? In terms of when you're writing, what could you put across that was different in the way the way you were talking about food, the way you're talking about eating, the way you're talking about Los Angeles?
Well, when I read these food blogs, they were all kind of a similar demographic. They were either like middle-aged Asian parents, or there were people from the West Side. So there wasn't anyone like Latino like that I would like that I can read that was food blog. I'm sure Gustavo Arellano was, but I still hadn't encountered him back in 2007, 2008. So I don't know. It's something I consider. I realize how lucky I've been in the sense that I found my passion early in life, my two passions, which is writing and food. And I don't know. The rest is all just serendipity, I guess. As cheesy as that sounds.
We've given the West Side a pretty hard time so far. It's funny. The West Side, most of my friends consider it to be a place with, quote unquote, no food. Oftentimes other people will say, the East Side, that's got no food. Why is there this back and forth, like you've got no food, no, you've got no food? They both have food, right?
Yeah, they both got food, but they both have food, but they just don't, just different kinds of food. It's really hard. It's funny that I mentioned this because I recently did a story on ceviches, where I highlight 8 ceviches for LA Times, and that made it to print, so I was really ecstatic about that. And I read about ceviches, and I looked for a ceviche in Santa Monica, in like the West Side area. The truth is, there wasn't really any, and I ate a bunch. There's pico, there's mochica, but I personally can't afford those foods. Everything there is a little overpriced for me. And then I found this place, Tacos Punta Cabras, in Santa Monica. I forgot what street it's on.
How did you find it?
Well, the chef is into punk rock, so
It's a great connector.
I think I ran into him at a show one day, and he probably knocked me down and like picked me up, and like, hey, I'll actually have a restaurant, bro. Like, come check it out. So, but actually, like the chef Gil, he takes he actually has the best tortilla that I've had in LA, just because he makes his, I don't know if he buys it or he makes it, but he seasons it with a bunch of like citrus zest and olive oil and a bunch of really cool flavors and really cool thing. And he also has a scallop ceviche that's a die for, and a vegan cauliflower ceviche, which I'm an equal opportunity eater, and I always try to highlight at least one vegan place too in everything that I write. But it's
kind of its own cuisine, ultimately, like it's its own genre of food.
It's its own genre, and people can avoid it. Anthony Bourdain can hate it. People can hate it. But the reality is that there is a huge demographic of vegan people, or people that are are closeted vegans, and they don't, and they always strive for the veggie option as opposed to the seafood option or meat option. So I realized this early on in my career, and I've always tried to appease them too.
How many connections do you find between the punk rock worlds and the food worlds? That can't be the only one. I can imagine there are some food people there into punk rock secretly, maybe. Or they're secretly into one, publicly into the other, or vice versa. There's got to be those people, right?
Yeah, definitely there's a lot of chefs and line cooks that are punk rockers themselves, and they grow up on punk rock. And I was just reading on the LA Times this last Saturday that the new chef of, I think his name is Fred something Rocher. No, that's the chocolate. His name is Perfecto Rocher, yes. And he's a chef for Smoke, Oil, Salt. And one of the questions that they asked him was, "What do you listen to when you're cooking?" He's like, "Oh, the Ramones or the Clash, like classic punk rock." So I've actually this topic. I've been diving more into it, and I've been trying to make something happen between the two that connect the two. So I'll let you know as soon as I do, but there definitely is a connection.
Seems like if anywhere there's a connection, it's got to be here, right? Maybe New York City. I don't know. It seems like Los Angeles is the place where food and punk rock could come together.
That's exactly the case. I'm a living example of that, and there's a couple. I'm also really good friends with the owner of Kanya, Alan. Not the owner, the manager of Kanya.
Just there, it's a good place.
That's an epic place. That's a really good place.
Good understates it.
Yeah, I underestimated too, and it's amazing drinks, and the owner of the manager of that bar, Alan Katz, he's like my go-to buddy. Like I go to every single punk show here in LA, even in Las Vegas. We always hang out and we go to punk shows together. So there definitely is a connection, and I've been diving more into the subject recently. So as soon as I could have more valid or something concrete to talk about, I'll definitely let you know about that. So.
Excellent. Now, one of the long-form pieces you got known for was Mexico Feeds Me, a story about you going to visit your family in Zacatecas, eating there, making food there. Was that the first trip of the serious eating kind you made back to Mexico?
Yes, definitely. I feel so blessed and so lucky to have been able to do that. Like at 20, both my parents don't speak Spanish. Don't speak English. They only speak Spanish. And up until that point, they never really understood my passion, my career as a food writer. Because you can tell them like, oh, papá escribo de comida, and they're like, what? Like, you write about food? Like, what? And you get paid for that? Like, bullshit. There's no way you're going to be able to have a successful life and buy a house when you get older, which is probably the case, but whatever. That's a different story.
None of us can.
And then one day, I was really I've been so lucky that I was able to personally meet James Ozelin, the editor-in-chief of Saveur, and read a story, like drive him around like LA and taking him out to go eat, and like he was here for as a judge on Top Chef, and I didn't realize like the hotshot that he was up until like after the fact, and I didn't realize how much power he had. And I guess
for the best.
And I guess he liked me, so I treated him like a normal human. I didn't treat him as like the editor-in-chief of like one of America's, like, if not the best gourmet food magazine out there. So he liked me, and like he sent his editors to go contact me, and we talked and we emailed, and it turned out like they liked the angle. I pitched the story of like, both my parents are from Mexico. I've never been. How cool would it be to, like, if I go down to Mexico as a Mexican American food writer that writes about Mexican food and like experience the foods of my parents like firsthand and write about that. So they actually sent me down there. It was that was really cool. Like they paid for my flight, my mom's flight. They rented us a car. We were out there for like a week. They sent out a photographer, and we just did everything from like tortillas to like the local unpasteurized cheese to like 20 varieties of beans and chiles and like it was that point that like once I was able to fly up my mom to go visit her family, and my grandpa was like really old, and like I think that was the turning point in my parents' career of making them realize like, oh wow, okay, I now understand what my son does, and it's really cool.
What is it about Zacatecas food specifically that's really good in comparison to even all other Mexican food, which is already good?
The truth of the matter is that Zacatecas is definitely one of the least glamorous states in Mexico. I mean, there's a lot of so I'm trying to use like the big word for it, but there's a bunch. People don't have that much money there, and the thing to look forward to there is like when you think of Zacatecas foods, you're gonna think of gorditas zacatecanas, which are kind of similar to pupusa, which is a corn turnover type of thing, but there's no grease in it. You actually you make a thicker tortilla and you wait until it puffs up, and right when it puffs up, you take it open, you split it open, and you kind of stuff it with whatever you now have, like with either stewed nopales with chili and pork, or like beans or cheese, and that's a gordita, and that's the, without a doubt, the essential food of Zacatecas as a state. There's gorditas zacatecanas. Other than that, I mean, there's like 20 different styles of beans. You want to have all these different types of beans. There's amazing cheeses that are all made by like my aunt is a cheesemaker, and she makes amazing unpasteurized. All cheeses are unpasteurized. There's some aged cheeses. She has a cheese cave, and she dunks her cheese in like a red chili. I guess, yeah, just a simple red chili, and so that you have like a red chili rind around this aged cheese, and it's just amazing on a tortilla, on a freshly made tortilla. It's just amazing. And so it's a bunch of different. Another cheese that I love there is a cheese made from an asadero type of cheese. So it's like a very fresh, oozy type of mozzarella type of cheese that is made only when cows have calves and when their milk is extra fatty. And what you do is you take some of that milk and you make a cheese with that milk, and it was so hardcore. I think I was too young to appreciate it, and it was really good, but it was just really like dairy, like fat, and like all your face, like more than like any other like ice cream or yogurt. And
not subtle about it.
Yeah, it was definitely hardcore. And that's Zacatecas cuisine. Lots of corn, lots of but that's about it. There really isn't much there. So when I went there, it really made me appreciate just like the subtle foods and the food that often was vegetarian by default, just because it's in Zacatecas, because there isn't that much money around. It's much smarter to keep a cow for dairy than to slaughter it than for a couple of weeks of food. So I really realized that, and that story was like amazing, and still to this day, I mean, every time I eat like a bowl of beans with tortillas and cheese and a good piece of cheese, I almost cry. It's just so good. So.
You mentioned nowadays you're going to Mexico like 3 times a year. So was it something in doing that story that hooked you on the motherland?
Yeah, that too. And my dad owns a couple of buildings and apartment buildings in Mexico City. So I would go down to Mexico City with him, and that's when I was exposed more to like the southern Mexican food and a lot of the street food and tacos and stuff. And then now, my girlfriend is from Mexico, and her family still lives there in Puerto Vallarta. So I'm pretty lucky that she's from there, and I get to go down there, which is a resort town, and it's pretty awesome. So
it's one of my favorite eating cities too, Mexico City, and I feel some other resonances between Los Angeles and Mexico City especially when I'm down in Mexico City. It's not just the amount of Mexican culture in both cities. There's something else in common there, isn't there? I'm not sure what it is. Maybe they're both really big. I don't know. Do you feel like they have much in common?
It just goes back to like what I'm telling you about. Well, what I'm telling you about food culture and how, in Mexico people live to eat. If you think about it, like they're like if you don't have that much money, you can go out and get yourself an amazing taco. Here, it's not so much the case because there are a bunch of regulations that street food people have to follow. A lot of times there's street vendors that get shut down here all the time, which has reinforced a policy that I hold now. As enticing as it is to write about, like the taquero, a person here that's doing tacos de canasta, which is a super regional style Guadalajara tacos from Guadalajara that they're tacos that are folded together and like maybe like a couple hundred inside of a wicker basket, and they're all kind of steamed together, and it's really unique taco. And I found a place here that has it, and as tempting as it is to write about it, and many other street food similar to that have really cool, tasty foods, I don't write about them anymore because you're messing with the livelihoods of these people. So, and they're feeding their kids through that, and they're probably putting them through school too. So I don't write about it anymore, and it's been really hard because usually what ends up happening is that another food writer comes along and writes about them, and sure, I could have taken the credit for that, but it's like I can't do it anymore just because I've learned the hard way about one place that I wrote about, and they got shut down. So, and I felt horrible about that. So after that, I haven't done that. And Mexico City, you don't have much regulation. In Mexico as a whole, you don't have much regulation, and if there are regulations, people don't tend to follow them. And if people are breaking the laws, there aren't many people that enforce it. So
it's getting shut down because somebody wrote about them.
So because there's that much freedom in Mexico, there's just so much more stuff that can happen there. And I think that's like the kind of intangible thing that you're talking about. It's just the craziness of and the utter relentless speed of life in Mexico City and other parts of Mexico that you can just do whatever you want and people will love it and you won't get shut down for it. So
it's interesting you bring that up. Like I was thinking, it came to my mind, where do I usually like to get street food in Los Angeles? And there's a stretch, I won't even name it because of what you said. Like there's a stretch in Koreatown where I live where there's a lot of people who just roll out, burners and griddles onto the sidewalk, and there's a lot of good stuff for sale there. And I always wondered, like, these couple blocks are doing this every night. They've been doing it for a long time. No one shut them down. I'm glad they haven't been shut down, but I wonder what causes, like, what allows that to happen in Los Angeles, where you get these pockets of Mexico City like unregulation and they survive. I mean, how does that work?
They're waves, to be honest. I mean, it's you gotta travel in packs when you do those, because usually what ends up happening in the way that's set up is that there's always going to be one person that's gonna have to sacrifice their things, or two people. Although there have been times when like the city comes and sweeps up everyone in streets like that, because there are a couple of streets here in LA that, again, I won't say. If you want to know, email me and maybe I can take you out to them. But usually what ends up happening is like there's one place that that the city comes and cites them for, and the ticket is like $500 or more. And they throw away their food, and they throw away their grill, and they throw away all that cooking stuff. And then, you know, once this person sees it, once that person gets like canned, everyone else, you know, shuts down and runs away, and so that's always the way it is. I mean, it's really sad the way they live, but when it comes to like that constant fear of getting a ticket and having to go to court for it or pay for it, you know, when they're just making a living. And I understand, you know, sure, like they're not paying taxes and they're not being you know, it's not regulated, but why not regulate it? You know, weed is almost, you know, it's almost illegal here, so why not make taxes?
Why not pupusas?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and God bless. I mean, I say that as a freaking atheist, but like God bless, like, you know, all those people that like that do that every day and put their everything that they have, their investments on the line just to feed us these amazing foods. And I mean, it makes me a little sad just thinking about it, because, you know, I told you one place that I wrote about got shut down, so it's a fine line, man. It's a really fine line, and both as a consumer and as a person in the media, you really have to respect what they do. And the term respect can be pretty vast in this sense, because respect can be to not yelp about it, or to not, you know, just keep it like a little as a secret that it is. But the good thing about the street food scene is that even if it gets shut down, like I'm pretty sure that one has been shut down, it's gonna come back sooner or later to full force yet again. It's just, you know, you can't really, you can cite one person or a dozen people, but there's gonna be like 100 others that will come up and take that spot and do it again, or that same family.
The commercial energy is there, the culinary energy is there. It's going to spring up somewhere else, not far away, probably.
Exactly, and so yeah, and you see
the punk scene. You can't stamp it down.
You know, it goes through its waves. You know, sometimes there isn't much. I've recently been into like pop punk lately, and there isn't much pop punk here in Los Angeles. So I have to outsource my pop punk fans from other states.
Where's it going on now?
I think Philadelphia was named like the best pop punk city in the U.S. And that's, you know, all these millennials that grew up listening to hard punk, to hard, relentless, fast, abrasive punk rock like I did, are growing up, getting better at the instruments and making nice stuff that you can listen to every day and like sing with your girlfriend, and everything's cool. So.
Sure. What types of food do you want to write about the most these days in Los Angeles? Do you like to write about foods that are emerging or foods that are established? I mean, what do you prefer in that sense?
You know, oftentimes I get pigeonholed just because, you know, I am Mexican American, and I did grow up eating Mexican food, and I can tell you like what the differences are between this thing and that thing, and so I do write about those things a lot. But I love writing about everything. To be honest, I mean, if I get assigned something, I'll write the hell out of it and I'll get it done, and it'll be really cool. And so because at the end of the day, I like to write. I mean, I'm a writer, and then food was like a passion almost as strong as writing, and music is too. But these days, you know, for better or for worse, it's all about listicles and writing and 10 best things, or 8 best things, or 5 best things. Yeah,
or indeed 5 worst. I mean, people love all those things.
Yeah, you know, it's all like this BuzzFeed generation, like, you know, that just wants to read short, quick, easy, little text of everything, and that's what I've been doing now. You know, it's been taking a toll on my writing career just because I don't have much long form writing now. I'm sure like every other writer in the U.S. or that writes like that's a journalist too. So I've been meaning to get back into more longer form styles of writing and more cohesive, like 2,000 word stories as opposed to like 1,500 word story with like 100 word little different voices and themes and
all in fragments.
That's cool too. That's really easy to write. Yeah, but I definitely want to do more. Just whatever. I mean, you know, so much to write and so little time. It really is a. When it comes down to it, that's what it is. There's so much to write about. So many people have stories. So many good dishes. So many good drinks. And just gotta do one thing at a time.
Definitely true. I've been speaking today with the former Teenage Glutster, the current just Glutster, writer about food, writer about booze, writer about punk rock, Javier Cabral. Javier, thanks so much.
Thank you, man. And thanks for having me. This is really fun.
It's never not a pleasure to talk about food or Los Angeles. And we've covered both of those amply, and indeed punk rock and more. You can find more from him on, is it theglutster.com?
Yeah, it's theglutster.com. Which, by the way, going to your earlier question, you asked me how I came up with that word. I was just bored one day, and I just took the root word. I like the term gluttony, but I didn't want to pick glutton because it was too hardcore and too religious. So I just took the root word of gluttony and added the last part of hipster. So that was it, Glutster.
Make it more fun.
Yeah, exactly, made it more fun. And yeah, you can find me on theglutster.com. It's GLUTSTER.com, and also at Doug Glutster on Instagram and Doug Glutster on Twitter and Facebook.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Special thanks to everyone who backed Season 4 on Kickstarter, including Joel Neville Anderson, Daniel Levin Becker, Paige Calvert, Commander Manvark, Jonathan Crow, John Cunningham, David Dawes, James DeVito, Tim Dobbs, Paul Doyle, Jake Elliott, Kevin Emmett, Lawrence English, Jonathan Filbert, Andrew Philippone Jr., Michael Fransky, John French, Themistocles Eucrucius, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Samuel Hansen, David Hayes, Jeff Hillenbrand, Mark Hines, Andrew Johnstone, Tadeusz Andrzej Kodlubowski, Peter Kavanagh, Ted Kane, Andy Cooney, Evan Landman, Alfred Lee, James Maloney, Sean McDonald, Alberto Bruzos Moro, Jason Miller, Rob Montz, Daniel Murphy, Richard Nash, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Ian Blosker, Christopher Porter, MJ Pritchett, Piers Rippey, Rob Schultz, Todd Shimoda, Cam Smith, Deborah Smith, Adam Sutherland, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Anna Traher, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, Nick Weigelt, John Wolfe, Cynthia Yang, and Wayne Wright.